Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 59. And this is a special episode because for those of you watching it live, there's 3 boxes, not 2, because we have a special guest, Techno Tim. How you doing, Tim?
Hey, good. Real good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, this is fun. Your 100 days of Home Lab and the challenge with it. I like that there's not just let's play with stuff, but a commitment to doing it, because I think that's what really gets people going forward on it. You know what I mean? And picking these different projects. So you seem like the ideal guest. And if you haven't heard of the 100-day Home Lab challenge, that video will be linked in the description. Tim put that video out. We all participated in it. You know, it's always exciting when we submit a video to someone else putting a project. So I really didn't know what Tim was going for. But the end result was amazing.
It was.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to expand on that a little bit. I've been noodling on this idea for I don't know, like 6 months, and I kind of bounced some ideas off of you guys. I I explained a little bit, but I've been noodling on this idea for like 6 months. I'm a software developer for my real job. I actually took a little bit of time away from work to do this. But I'm a software developer, and software developers have had this challenge for a while. It's the 100 days of code, and I see it pop up in Twitter all the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, like,
Yep.
hey, like, the landscape of home lab and infrastructure and automation is in a cloud, non-cloud, hybrid cloud, networking, storage is rapidly changing. Like, we need something for people in home lab, and that's where I started thinking, like, hey, what if we did a home lab challenge? And then, yeah, you guys participated in my 100K sub video, which I greatly appreciated. It was awesome. Yeah, I was a little vague. I was like, hey, I want to do a 100K celebration, but not about me. I want to get people motivated about home lab. And oh, by the way, I think I might do this 100 days of home lab challenge. It was definitely interesting, like editing your guys' videos, and thank you so much for trusting me with your videos. It was very surreal, as it is now. Talking to you guys, I've listened to you guys for years, and you guys are the de facto standards for a lot of focus areas for me. So it's very surreal hearing your voices, but talking to me and not just on a video explaining how to do something in a home lab or technology or networking or Linux.
Interesting point. As much as I've chatted with you via Twitter and other places that we talk on Discord, you're right. This is the first time we've, I think, done a live or interactiveness like this, and we're doing it live in front of a whole audience. There's a bunch of people watching, so.
Yeah. I mean, we've chatted a little bit, yeah, but this is the first time like doing anything live. Yeah, I mean, I have my own live show, but it's always been by myself, so I greatly appreciate it. It's awesome for sure.
And I love to collaborate. It's just the greatest thing to just, get someone that, has something in common, just talk about that thing and just geek out about it. It's one of the greatest things about content creation when you get to share that with other people, not just the people watching, but someone in real time. It's just really cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely a lot of fun. And this is also, it's kind of fun because each one of us actually, interesting between the 3 of us, I do a lot of the hardware stuff when it comes to some of the physical servers and setup. Jay, really strong background in DevOps, and Tim being a software developer. If you work in a large company, we are the 3 personalities that exist to make that infrastructure work in the back end. Someone has to rack the drives and physically build the wiring in the servers. Someone has to do some build automation to get those DevOps things set up. And then someone's got to write the software this all runs on.
Full stack right here. I like it.
This is the full stack. That's what we should have called it.
You should probably mention Linode.
There you go.
Yes. If you don't have us 3 to set up your full stack, Linode does. You can get your home lab project spun up very quickly, or maybe you just have a home lab project that's not suited for your environment because, maybe you want it public facing. It's a great place to test everything. A lot of the projects we talk about here, Linode has been a longtime sponsor of the show. They have been, where we host everything. So we're not just saying nice things about them because they sponsor it, but literally because we use them. So if you listen to this podcast, it was literally downloaded from Linode servers. Jay is actually the one who maintains that in particular. So if it's not up and running, it's actually not Linode's fault. We can blame Jay. But so far,
that happened. I did break it once.
Jay did break it once. We had a really fun incident. One day we'll do some debriefs on that. But nonetheless, Linode, we thank them for sponsoring the show. They've been great to us, and we look forward to future sponsorships from them too. So that's we have an offer code to get you started. So head over to linode.com/thehomelabshow. Thanks. We keep the ad read simple. and
Yeah, we
sometimes
like to keep
impromptu.
things simple when we can, except for Homelab. We like to just overcomplicate everything because, connecting 10 things to one thing to this thing to that thing is just awesome. Actually, no, it's calculated and it's planned, and there's a reason why everything's there. So, we should probably talk about what the 100 Days of Homelab challenge actually is, where people can go to join up on this, how they do this, and how they get started, and try to get as many people in on this as we can.
And by the way, I'm impressed with the number of people using the hashtag on Twitter, so I'm watching that grow exponentially.
Yeah, I'm blown away too. My Twitter has never been so active. Not that I have a lot of followers, but I try to interact with anybody. I try to meet people where they're at, whether they're on YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, Twitter, anywhere. I always try to respond, but man, it's kind of tough keeping up with Twitter the last couple of days. But yeah, it's so the easiest way to get started is I built this website, it's 100daysofhomelab.com. It's actually self-hosted. It's built on top of open source. I containerized it. I built it in my own home lab at home, and I self-host it out of my home lab in my Kubernetes cluster. So like
Ooh.
end to end, it's running within my environment. Um, and that's where you can go. It's just a brief overview of the three things that really I'm just hoping people do. One, just commit to the challenge. Just say, "Yep, I can set aside 1 hour a day for the next 100 days to work on something in my home lab." And Tom, as you mentioned in the video, starting with a goal is fantastic. Like I totally agree. Um,
That's a lot of where people get stuck is they don't know what to do. There's so many, and it's funny because in my early days, as I think I'd mentioned having a TRS-80, there was very little you could do with it. You got a book and you started typing code because there was no websites in the 80s to go and copy it off of. So you just started typing code. So you're very, very purpose driven, but there was a narrow amount of things you can do. Now it's analysis paralysis if you looked at all the projects. But if you start with like, I want to build something, a web server, a 100 Days of Home Lab website, or I want to host my movies internally or something like that. You start with some of those goals and then everything will align itself around it essentially. Like, okay, I need storage, I need compute, I need these services to run, I need to run Plex, or I want to run Emby or any of the other options that are out there.
yeah, I totally agree. And I always mention too, like pick something you're passionate about because at the end of the day, like that'll help encourage you to do something and it'll be much more rewarding at the end too. Pick something you're passionate about because it'll, you'll learn along the way. And then that's a carrot at the end too, is hey, I did this thing that I really like. Um, and then, so too, it's publicly commit, and you don't have to publicly commit. I know that people do or don't or like or dislike social networks, totally fine. But we ask people if you are, hey, share it. I created a link on there that automatically creates a tweet for you and tweets it out, so you don't even have to type anything.
Well, and
um,
I think the commitment part is really important. It was something, me and Jay started being friends a few years ago, but where we really started being a little bit closer in terms of where we're aligned with creating content on YouTube was, sometimes a term you may hear in business is like an accountability partner. And it's just
Right.
having more people in the community to encourage you to do things. And so me and Jay started doing that, which actually led to us meeting you. And now we have a group of us YouTube creators. You notice that we all kind of share some of the other things, Wendell and in Veronica Explains and you and a list of other YouTubers, we've all kind of gotten together and said, let's all talk about these things and encourage each other. But also, this is where that 100 lab, the Home Lab challenge comes in because once you have more people willing to help you and kind of encourage you along the path, people really are. If you have a question, just not me and Jay, but other than me and Jay, like other people are going, hey, let me help you get to your goal. What part didn't you understand? Or hey, here's the command I use to make that work or solve that problem. Or here's the hardware I think works best with this. And hey, look, it's on sale. Here's a link. There's that encouragement. It goes a long ways to getting people from feeling alone about getting started to being part of a community committed to it.
That's
yeah,
so important because I've often felt like I'm in my own little world that's just segregated. Like I could be around like 50 people, but still kind of feel like I'm kind of on my own because they're talking about, a lot of people like sports. Sports are awesome. It's just not my thing personally, but of course they're going to talk about those things and things they're passionate about. But hearing conversations in a crowd about technology just doesn't happen very often. So Tom and I go to Penguicon, And it's like, I feel like I could talk about, I don't know, randomly SSH. I guarantee you probably a third at least of the crowd knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then you get like-minded people, in content, and people realize, that's actually a lot more popular and than I thought. And how many people in a crowd are into technology and they don't even mention it because they assume that everyone else doesn't know what they're talking about, but for all they know, there could be several other fans there. So I feel like it's also kind of bringing this awesome geek stuff that we do into the mainstream. Like, we have this hobby and it's fun, and we're not as nerdy as as we are in the movies. We're actually kind of cool. And we do this technology thing, and you could do that with us.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. That's a good call out too. Like, you do hear people talk about sports quite a bit, and a team they're rooting for, or a team they don't like, or a neighboring team, or a rival team. I feel like we have those kinds of conversations, either in Discord or wherever, in our own group, amongst brands and technologies
Oh,
too.
yeah.
People root for brand A or brand B, and I don't like brand A or brand B, but it's that same kind of rivalry you feel with sports. I feel that same way when I talk to people about how I set something up, or I use 10 gig or I don't use 10 gig. Those kind of rivalries, and those things that come up are one, great learning experience, but two, still connect people
Right.
across different experiences.
So as much
Right.
as I'm not thrilled with the distro wars, which we can call it, but there is something fun about it. And the reason why is because when you're passionate about something, or even myself, I just did some videos recently on hypervisors, and I talked about KVM, and I talked about Zen, and then I talked about Proxmox, and I talked about CPNG. In order for me to even get the Proxmox video, and one person was still upset that I did it all. He says I was not qualified to do Proxmox, which made me laugh. But I said, being video, it took more research because I don't usually use Proxmox. I think it's a good solution, so I don't hate people that use it by any measure. I'm on team XCPNG, but it forced me to learn deeper features I don't even use. It also forced me to learn deeper the other side. And I think that's sometimes where the rivalry comes in, because you want to be right about your product. You want to be an advocate for the product or the distro or the editor that you use, Vi versus Emacs. But it forces you into this competitiveness because they're like, I like it because it has this feature. And when someone says that, you're like, oh, but mine, I think, has that feature. Hold on, let me read. So I think that's actually some of the fun that comes out of it. It's not all bad. It's as long as you keep it lighthearted, if you will. But there's certainly I use Arch, by the way, kind of people. So
Yeah.
we know it's another joke in our industry. But either way, in some bigger picture, it does make it kind of fun.
And another thing I wanted to point out too is that this isn't always the case, obviously. But there is a subset of people that work in IT that maybe they work in a small IT team. They could even be the only IT person, which I think should never be the case, because you should never rely on just one person to maintain your infrastructure, right? That person never gets a vacation. But usually what happens is that it feels like you against the world, because you have to maintain the servers for the company and do the best thing. And other people in the company really don't know what you're talking about. So if you want to talk to a coworker about the best way to tune the TCP/IP stack, they're going to look at you like, I work in accounting. But then when it comes to Homelab, there's no shortage of people to talk about, and you could literally build some at least somewhat equivalent system like work, or maybe just set up the same software on your side and then try to experiment with it. Then you might have a colleague that's also a home app fan that you just chat with online, and they're like, yeah, did you ever try X, because that would totally eliminate like a couple layers of your setup. And then you start to realize that the stuff that you do for home lab, if you do this for a living, can go to work and then help you be more, proficient there. Or if you don't have a job in IT, it could totally help you get your foot in the door.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And just to kind of expand on that a little bit about sharing information with people, something I've noticed too in Home Lab, especially just over the last couple of years, is people are willing to share how they solve stuff too. Like, people kind of want this platform to talk about what they did and why they did it. how they solved a particular problem. And oh, by the way, here's all of the code or documentation on how to do that too. And it's fantastic. So through that, over the last couple of years, I feel like I'm working on this bigger team, this bigger team than I've had, the 10 years prior, because I've been doing it for a long time. After college, I had this old crusty computer that was like already 10 years old that was in my basement. And that was, my first home lab computer. And it was me figuring out stuff by myself for 10 years. And then eventually it was like, well, people started asking me how I did this, or how's my blog at home, or what network, equipment do you use? And now it's to the point where there are communities built around this, even shows and channels built around this where people can share these ideas. And it's just great. I mean, I feel like we're all in this together. And on top of that, like standing on the shoulders of giants like you two, we have these great channels that are putting out great content of how to do things. And people really, really study those guides and take it, word for word. But at the same time, if they deviate from a standard, they'll be sure and tell you why and how they did it and why they did it. And I just feel like, man, the last couple of years have been fantastic for Homelab, for me personally, just because getting into it with content, but at the same time discovering this like huge community around it. I feel like I'm on this team of like 1,000, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
For all of its flaws, YouTube has been in the big picture, a overall great place to share a lot of this knowledge. There's a lot of different communities, not just Homelab, it's greater than that, but in amongst the people sharing different technology ideas, putting them together, including a lot of cybersecurity people, like my friend John Hammond. He does a lot of deep dives on reverse engineering and things like that. So even if you somewhat wander a little bit out of Homelab and come back over to things like the cybersecurity side of it, because it's a fast growing market that needs more people in it. It's been a great facilitator having all these different videos available to you, like the library of knowledge that you can watch for almost free. You do have to watch some stupid repetitive ads. So
Right.
but that's a pretty minor inconvenience in comparison to what, a college career costs to learn a lot of these same things.
And your friend John sounds pretty nice, but if he ever says anything about opening up a park, please stop him.
I
Don't let him do
know.
that.
Being an IT guy named John Hammond, I mean, come on. Yeah. I'm surprised his handle isn't like Jurassic John or something like that.
You may as well have fun with it, right?
Yeah. Just
That's
own it. You've been named that. That's just
I think it's interesting to hear how people got started with Homelab, and maybe we could kind of do that. I feel like how I started. I'm just going to make a guess. Like probably one third of Homelab is fans that have started this way, and this is going to be extremely common. I started because I was studying for a certification. Actually, certifications. I've had several of those. And, when I was looking into how to get a certification in IT, usually people will say, well, you could just download this emulator and it just perfectly matches the real switch hardware and all this. And you could just install it on your computer and learn that way. And then I remember thinking, why would I want to install an emulator? Like if I'm running Nintendo games, I'm totally fine with that. But I don't want to emulate hardware. Give me the hardware. And I would just go on eBay and I would just buy some really old devices and then just start playing with them because it's just so much better to get started or to study for a certification when you have your hands on the thing. And then from there, it's like, oh, I could run a file server. I could, have virtual machines running, and then just kind of spiraled out of control. And here we are today.
The thing that really got me started, and I've posted it before, maybe I'll do a dedicated video because people always ask me, like, what is some of the old servers? And my oldest server was is before I was even using Monowall. I think it would have been probably it had a Mandrake firewall. It
Ooh.
was a Linux firewall from like 2000, so over 22 years ago. But I used to run a series of Unreal Tournament servers, so I had to have a firewall that had the capabilities to handle the all different servers that I had set up, and I rigged it together quite a bit, but it's where you really start learning, and it made me learn more about hosting, setting up Linux servers, because oddly Unreal Tournament 20 something years ago ran on Linux servers. Even though it was a Windows for playing the game, it was because gaming in Linux was non-existent 20 years ago. It's taken a long time for that world to change, but it was a lot of learning I had to do, and it really got me into Linux from a hosting perspective. I mean, I was already a mail server administrator in like 2000, but
I'm so sorry that you've
I
learned.
know, I know. I tell you, you will never learn as much as when you are a mail server administrator and on a Usenet post trying to learn proc mail recipes to stop the latest spam. That was my early days. So, but that was what I did for a day job, and then I took it all that knowledge home to actually do it because I was among the first to have a cable modem in my area where you could actually host things. So it was uh, wild times.
Fun times. And Unreal Tournament, yeah, absolutely. That was one of my first journeys into networking, is just getting two computers on the LAN when I first started I want this game to work between these two computers. And it took hours, because when you're first starting out, you don't know how to do this stuff. And it's so alien to you. You're kind of just like reading and hoping, and it's almost like you're just trying random things, hoping something is actually going to make it do the thing you're hoping it's going to end up doing. Then you break it, of course, and then you fix it, and eventually it works.
And I
Yeah,
think for a lot of people, the gaming is a big start. 'Cause even the generation today, I mean, what do you want to do? You want to host your Minecraft server because that's more popular if you're among that age group where my son's at. Unfortunately, he hasn't seemed to taken an interest in hosting it. He actually had one of my staff set it up he was smart enough to know to ask someone. But it's still starting with the goal, starting with something in your head like this is what I would like to do. Then the hardware. I seen someone post in the chat. They had like an old R710, which is a pretty dated system, but still very capable of getting something done. But they said, what to do with it. Well, come back to, is there a server or a service you'd want to host? And if you even talk about the Raspberry Pi, well, you need to have Jeff Gerling on sometime because he is the Raspberry Pi king. And Jay has quite a few of them too, though. You start with something really simple like that, and you can build all kinds of extensive things.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you mentioned, Jay, starting out with games. That's kind of, I think, my first networking foray. My brother and I wanted to play NBA Live 98 or something on our PCs. And I had no idea. Like, I wasn't even that much into computers. Like, I understood them, but I had one. I wasn't tech yet. And I remember just spending hours upon hours of like trying to figure out how to set a static IP address on a Windows 98 machine. I had a hub. It wasn't even a switch at the time. It was a hub, and configuring two static IPs and getting them to communicate. I mean, it took hours. But I vividly remember, network cables drawn through his bedroom to my bedroom and the hub in the middle because we didn't have long enough cables, and getting it working and just seeing the hub lights flash. And I honestly, I cried a little bit, not joking, because I was just like so happy that I had figured this out, this magic, of networking. And then we could play,
Mhm.
NBA Live 98 together, even though we were sitting in two different rooms. But yeah, that was my very first like networking experience besides, plugging in, a phone cord and a modem and, anything like that. But yeah, it was definitely that. And then that, I think that's what lit the, spark, that started the flame. That then I started realizing, oh, I could, if I had two computers, I could, do this. And, but
Yeah.
it wasn't until a couple of years later where I actually had one that was dedicated. It wasn't my main machine. Once I had a second computer that wasn't my main machine, that's when it really took off, because then, I stood up Windows Active Directory to figure that out, stood up Linux to figure that out. Then I started thinking like, hey, I want my own blog, and use Dyn DNS for my blog for years, because like this is awesome. I can get dynamic DNS and have people see content I write, and it just spiraled from there. But for me, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely it was a very, very related to gaming and getting two machines networking. It sounded like such a geek. I think my brother remembers that I cried, but I'm not gonna lie, I think I
Yeah.
did. There were
That's
tears of joy.
that's totally fine. The thing is, you mentioned, talking about gaming, it's one of two moments before the certification thing that kind of like really got me into technology. Video games was the first. I grew up without a computer till I was like 18 or 19. Before I had my first computer, I'm not even kidding. We couldn't afford it. It just wasn't ever going to happen. So computers to me were like this miraculous thing that only the rich people could afford. No, I was just substantially poor. It wasn't that at all. But in my eyes, it was like, only the wealthy people can have a computer. So I remember as a young teenager, actually, I might have been 11 or 12. I'm walking down the street. I must have been very outgoing. I see this truck and this guy getting out of the truck, and inside the back of the truck was like a mountain of computer parts, like cases, and just like it looks like he's salvaging computers. I'm like, what's up with the computer parts? And he was like, oh yeah, I get parts and I build computers. I'm like, you can build computers? And I was thinking before that computers are something that can only come out of the factory. I didn't have any exposure to buying a part and putting it into a computer. I've never seen that before. So the whole concept that this individual was able to do that was huge. And then later on, I became very angry as a few years later because I was a huge Final Fantasy fan, and Squaresoft of Japan decided that Americans are not to have Final Fantasy V. And there was a whole bunch of drama about that. And I remember going to a friend's house who had a computer, which was amazing, and he was playing Final Fantasy V in English. I'm like, how in the heck are you playing a game in English that was never released here? And he says, well, I have this ROM and there's this translation patch that people got together to work on. I'm like, okay, so people just weren't satisfied, or not satisfied. People weren't just accepting of the fact they're never going to get this game. They decided to translate it themselves, work together, solve the problem, and just release it for free. So, yeah, I'm playing it right now. I'm like, oh my God. And then that was the time I realized that collaboration in tech is super powerful and we could solve problems that companies can't solve. And then from there, I just became more and more and more obsessed, and the rest is history. So it's interesting you mentioned games, because that was just such a moment for me that I was able to play a game that the company decided that I should not be able to play.
Yeah, the other aha moment for me was, again, I didn't get a computer till later in my life. We bought a Commodore 64 when I was older from a garage sale, and that was our computer, but it was already 10 years old, but it was still awesome to me. But like my other aha moment, very, very relatable to what you said, was, when I went to college, my PC didn't have a network card in it. They just didn't have them at the time, and I had no idea. I was the same way. I was like, what do I do now? And they were like, you can just buy one for however much, I forget what it was, and then ask someone to put it in. I was like, how the heck do you put this thing in? Like, there's no way, I'm not qualified to do this, And I asked my RA at the time, Rodney. I was like, Rodney, can you help me out real quick? You know about computers. And I saw he had, a cart full of computers in his dorm room. And he opened it up, put the card in, and I saw how easy it was. And that's when I was like, never again, like, I can do this by myself. But that was, yeah, I agree. It was, I was blown away when I learned you can, customize and expand computers too. It was another aha moment for me, where I was like, okay, I can do this by myself now. Then there was lots of tinkering along the way in college, because I was in the dorm rooms and I could do whatever I want. But yeah, I totally agree.
Let's go forward a little bit, because you go from I'm not qualified to having some really solid Kubernetes and hyperconverged infrastructure videos
Yep.
that I've been watching. You covered Harvester, which is really cool. A few people have asked me about it, and I've just simply replied, I did watch your video on it, and I think it's really cool. And there's some complexities to some of these, but what brought you all the way? Because you do, is it your day job that you do a lot of Kubernetes, or is that more of a hobby?
Oh, yes. Yes, I'd say, so what brought me to Kubernetes? It was really, so I've worked at different companies. I don't want to say bounced around, because it sounds like the wrong term, but I've moved to different companies, and along the way, those companies have been using Kubernetes. When I first started, I had no idea, but I was on a team where we were building software, and the way to get that software into their production environment was to put it in a container. So, I was on a newer team. We were building a newer project. So I said, we're going to take the newer platform at this environment, and we're going to put our code inside of containers, and we're going to ship it into this thing called Kubernetes, or however you pronounce it.
Yeah.
And, we're going to play this game because it seems like the easiest way to get our code into production. So I learned about it a lot at that company. But then, after I left and I had my home lab, I write software outside of work too. right, tons of little, websites,
Yeah.
bots, just fun things. And I wanted that same pipeline. Like I wanted to be able to write code, put it in a container, and put it in production, my production, in minutes automatically and not touch anything. And so that's where I was like, I'm going to try Kubernetes at home. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds complicated, but I'm going to do it at home. And it was all like driven from this me wanting to get, repeatable code into production as fast as possible. And, not have to mess with the alternative ways is, write my code and then maybe SSH and put that inside of some, service and restart that service and then have that spin up. And so I adopted a lot of things I learned at work and applied them to my home lab. But then at the same time, I then learned, exponentially more about Kubernetes working at home that now I can apply to work. It's like this, this cycle, this feedback loop of, I want to learn something. I do it at home. I found out something awesome. I can apply it at work. Oh, I learned this at work. I'm going to apply it at home. And
Yep.
it's this awesome feedback loop. So, I do some Kubernetes stuff at work. Even today, I work at a small startup, a really awesome startup, and it's pretty awesome. We all wear many hats. Part of that is Kubernetes. A large part of that is writing code, but it could be many other things too. So, it's a little bit of DevOps. It's software engineering. It's you name it. Any title you can think of, we do to have services out there and running. Even some networking and stuff, even some tech support at some point in time. It's pretty great. It's pretty great going back to a smaller company and wearing all these hats that I kind of wear in my home lab too. So it's pretty fun. But
It's gotta
yeah,
be such a great feeling to work for such a company because it's sometimes like some companies just see technology as the thing they have to do that they don't want to do, but we just kind of have to do the technology thing, darn it. And then you have companies that are all about it. And I think working for a company that lives and breathes technology is exactly the type of company that a individual that lives and breathes technology needs to work for in order to be happy. Because if you can't work for a company that hates technology, it just doesn't work.
yeah, and we are a technology company too, so that kind of helps. That our product, our digital products. So
Yeah.
it really helps. But yeah, it's allowed me to grow and explore so many things I wouldn't have time to at home, and vice versa. At home, then I learn all of these things and I can apply them at work. I think monthly or something, and at least monthly, I pick up a few things at home that I get to try at work, and vice versa. I learn so much at work too, because it's really focused on having a solid, dependable, highly available service for millions of customers. I get to apply some of those principles at home. I don't have to, I'm not serving out millions of customers at home, handfuls, dozens maybe, but still I get to absorb some of that knowledge and kind of pick and choose and apply that to stuff at home. It's great.
It
I
is.
I think an important aspect too, and this is something me and Jay have talked about, and there's a lot of others on YouTube, and I'm loving seeing this. We're not people who read this from a book, stood it up in our lab, and that's it. We've showed you the basics on how to get it going. You gain a lot of knowledge deploying these things out in the field. I've always liked that old adage: "No battle plan survives contact with the enemy." And you can read the book, you can get it all stood up, but actually servicing things at scale, you run into lots of quirks. One of the things you had mentioned in one of your videos was you talk about things like disk pressure, and because you have to think about performance, and everyone, they want the magic of hyperconverged infrastructure and high availability replicated storage with something like Longhorn, but you're like, by the way, to actually make that work and get the IOPS you want, you need some incredible hardware. And there's sometimes design considerations because there's always budget considerations, which are driving design considerations. Because sometimes people say, well, why don't you have this configured hyperconverged so it's magically replicated? I'm like, because that cost IOPS, that cost the interconnects between have to be, well, they become the weakest link in the number of IOPS you want to get. But that's not something you think about from a lab standpoint. That's something when 10,000 people, 20,000, 100,000, and keep scaling up are using your product and it's online facing. You go, oh, I don't have the database activity at home I do in this production environment I can see where everything's stretched thin. I mean, it sounded great to replicate it. That can't actually be replicated at the speed the data comes in because I didn't plan enough or I didn't have the budget to build the interconnects. So speak to that just a little bit of what some of those learning lessons.
Yeah, so I think there are lots of lessons along the way when building any kind of system. A lot of people I've noticed gravitate towards the stuff that I do that's highly available. You guys probably see this
Yeah.
too. Whenever you mention something that's highly available, fault tolerant, people are really interested in that because having something that's highly available means more uptime, but it also introduces a lot of complexity, a lot of complexity that I've either stumbled into, figured out on my own, or didn't read along the way and figured out myself. Um, but it is tough. For instance, people always want. You mentioned disk pressure. People want this magic solution that's like, hey, let's spin up a Kubernetes cluster. Let's throw 30 containers inside of there. Each of those containers are 2, 3, 400 megabytes, or even maybe gigs. And then all of a sudden, Kubernetes says, I have disk pressure warnings. People are like, why do I
Yeah.
have disk pressure warnings? That's just a warning basically saying, hey, Kubernetes disks are running out of space. We're not going to do anything else until you clean some stuff up. Otherwise, Kubernetes won't run. It's probably a little more technical than that, but you kind of have to plan some of these things out. Some of them you'll discover along the way, but when you started getting into things that are highly available, you got to think about all kinds of things. I didn't even think about, load balancers, preventing like split brain scenarios, keeping, services up. If you have stateful services, those can't really be scaled well. When I say stateful services, one of the going back to Homelab, one of the things people like to host a lot is like Plex, and Plex, isn't designed to be scaled. It's
Right.
designed to run as one. You run two, you run into a split brain scenario where one thinks it's, the one that has all of the data, and then another thinks it has all of the data. And then so sometimes when you send that traffic to individual services or pods, each one thinks it's the one that should be running and doesn't know about the other. And so a lot of times people think like, hey, if I'm running Kubernetes, I have Plex, I'm just going to run 5 instances of Plex because I want it to be highly available. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
These
No.
systems has to be architected and designed in a way that they can be highly available, which means if you can make them stateless and put your state somewhere else, like in a database or somewhere else, to where these pods are I don't want to say dumb, but they're stateless to where they don't know about each other, and the only way they do is from some other service or database or something else out there. And so those are the kind of things I run into a lot. Things that I've had to learn along the way. I have very simple even code I write that I don't think up front like, hey, I need to scale this service. I go to scale it and I'm like, oh crap, I didn't I have local account of something in memory, and now that count only exists inside of that one service, so I can't scale this service until I rethink about it. So um
Mhm.
and the same goes with storage too. A lot of people, think, I mean, Longhorn, I think is pretty awesome. Ceph's
Yeah.
pretty awesome. Rook is another way to get, it's kind of complicated even for me to think about because I haven't done a ton of stuff in storage. I've done some, but, Longhorn is this way to get, highly available block storage inside of your cluster. So basically you could have, it's kind of hyper converged to where the storage is floating around inside of your Kubernetes cluster, just using up available extra storage on all your nodes. It's pretty cool because you can replicate that across all of your nodes, your servers. And then if one goes down, they can just point all of your services to the other place and then re-replicate on another one. And Rook does that same thing, which is based on Ceph. I haven't done a ton in Ceph, but it's that same idea where you can replicate storage to a Ceph cluster using Rook. But
Hmm.
storage is another thing where even simple things like NFS, like people are like, I want highly available NFS. I'm like, I have no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
I don't
I
think
have no
NFS
idea.
has any idea how to do that.
I was going to mention because 45 Drives is in here. Maybe they're still watching. They have some really good topics where they dive deep into Ceph. But we're a 45 Drives partner, so when I'm not doing YouTube things, my business hat is on. We are building solutions for clients. And someone asked when we built our petabyte storage server for one of our clients, like, "Oh, Tom, I can't believe you didn't use Ceph." And I'm like, "Why would I?" Even the 45 Drives consulting team, they don't start with the most complicated solution. You build up to the solution and no more. You want to be able to support this. It's actually supported on TrueNAS with their internal team that we provide this for. TrueNAS is easy for them to manage, and the adding Ceph as a layer on top of it would serve no purpose other than a layer of complexity. So it's weird how many people ask me those same questions, because there's always those second guessers when you do make a video. Why would you do it that way, Tom? Modern file systems all use Ceph, as if Ceph is an actual file system as opposed to a distributed way. And it's like, look, it's ZFS in the back end. We only need to present it as an SMB. They're just dumping data sets for a system to process data sets to do calculations. Like, I don't know where Ceph fits into this workload that they have, because I think they have 8 compute nodes that just look at SMB data across an SMB share, process it, and give output. That's it.
I know where to go for storage questions. It's Tom all the time.
I do it all the time myself on my end. And Tom
too.
can tell you, I've had some very interesting problems that only I can find, because I have this just ability to find issues that other people are like, how did you run into that exactly? Like,
Jay and his NFS stale file handle problem you had. I think that was one of them we troubleshot a while ago.
well, I never solved it. I thought I did. And the issue was that for whatever reason, like I was switching to everything to Flatpak. I really like Flatpak. But I started my Ansible scripts would remove the deb package for Firefox and install the Flatpak, for example. Same with Thunderbird and the other things. And then what I would notice is that Firefox would lose the ability to upload files. Like you could click upload like a YouTube video, right? And then the file picker dialog comes up. You select the video that you want to upload. You click OK, nothing happens. It's like it never got the request. And there's errors in the logs, a bunch. So it's not like I didn't know what it was saying. And then I traced it down to, something Flatpak related. Like, and I still to this day, I had to stop using Flatpak for Firefox and Thunderbird because something that I'm doing basically makes Firefox useless. It would randomly work, randomly stop working when it comes to uploading files. There'd be like XDG document portal errors all over the place. And I'm like Googling for this. And it's like, am I really the only person running into this? I could wipe my machine and just continue to and set it up. And the only thing I could think to blame is that it's expecting something to always be mounted. And because I'm using NFS that auto mounts, it just really kind of it gets confused with open file handles. I mean, these are only problems that somebody gets to at the end of the Homelab journey, right? Because usually most people are fine to just take the deb package of Firefox or whatever and just call it a day. But no, I have to go a different direction, and because I go that other direction, I find bugs and I find them everywhere. So I mentioned to Tom, like, you use Flatpak, can you just like open up a file? Does it work? Oh, it does. How does that work?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned NFS and problems because I run into them too, and they're ones that I've just discovered along the way. Like I love NFS, like it works great, but there are some use cases where it doesn't really work well. One that I always run into is like with SQLite databases. I haven't really figured it out, but it's sometimes in containers, if you mount your storage over NFS, like SQLite databases like write some kind of lock file and it can't read that over NFS, and so things don't work. And so yeah, those are definitely the things you'll explore along the way. And sometimes, like you mentioned, at the end of your Homelab journey, I have people who, spin up NFS and then they get their containers going and then they mount all of their, they build up all their infrastructure to get this going. And they plan on NFS being their storage of choice for their containers, and then realize, hey, this container uses SQLite and I can't do it over NFS. So yeah, those are definitely the fun ones to figure out. And sometimes you figure them out really late in the game, like you mentioned.
I made sure to mention, because Windows have to deal with that a lot in my day job. But when I did my TrueNAS file permission videos, one of the things I covered is you probably got the permissions right, but Windows hasn't learned that you got them right. So you have to log in and out of Windows. People were telling me you shouldn't have to do that. I said, I can agree with you all day that if I adjust a permission in TrueNAS, Windows should reread the permission of that file. But I will tell you that it doesn't all the time. And I don't know what circumstances it does or does not. But I know if you log in and out of Windows, it then reads the permissions again when it reconnects, because TrueNAS is usually not part of, unless it is, but it's usually not part of an Active Directory domain. There is still a lot to that, and having storage persistence is like you even said, when you're spinning up these Kubernetes, if they spin up before the storage is attached, now they don't know what to do either. So it's very critical to getting all of this automation set up and making sure that these things work.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Kubernetes though is kind of nice because it'll the Kubernetes way is basically crash and restart until things work.
Yeah.
It's part of Kubernetes. You know, like if storage isn't there, it's going to say okay, exit, crash, start again. Is it there? And it'll do that over and over. I mean, eventually it'll start like backing off, but yeah, I've been there many times with my containers. I probably have a few in my own environment right now that are in a crash loop, but that's par for the course for Kubernetes.
Could even be a race condition, right? Because I'm sure you run into that many times too.
Yeah. Like, hey, like, a database connection it needs is not there, or it is there, or I wrote some code that's, supposed to be asynchronous and I didn't do it right. And it's, waiting on a database connection. Yeah, been there. I think it was there last night with something I was working on. Yeah.
My personal favorite is when it checks for the storage before the storage layer actually came up. So you have to kind of go in and, give one a timeout. So it kind of just waits longer. So one has a chance to come in. And so there's better ways, obviously, of having things start up in a certain order. But so many times. Like,
I've been there.
But then DNS, like we could complain about DNS.
DNS is its own episode.
It is. It's, I love it and hate it at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I need to do a video on it because that's literally what my team was chasing some crazy web DNS from a client we just took over. There's so much to it. And I'm like, sometimes you rely on me for some of the really esoteric, complicated things. All I know is if you look up DNS security trails, you can find some DNS history. And sometimes what you have to do when you take over a client and never want to let everything expire, you need to rebuild DNS from scrapping on the internet to figure out where everything used to be. There's a whole topic there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. We could even have a rant episode, but we won't. We're not doing that.
We won't. We're not just here to rant.
We're absolutely not going to do that, though.
It's too easy to commiserate because we're all mad at DNS.
So I think in getting back to the 100 days of Homelab thing, because I definitely want to make sure that we get people on that because it's really a great way to get started with this and. It's such an amazing idea. It really is an amazing idea. And some people out there might be, still hesitant to get started. And I say, just start. Like Tom says, you do have to have a goal. Yes. But you could also just install some random Linux distribution on a computer in your closet that you're just not going to use anyway. And of course, I could probably break the install and have to redo it a few times. I mean, just do something. That way you're kind of like getting into the habit of doing something or just kind of like installing Linux if that's where you're going to go. And just kind of like get your hands on it. And I feel like if you spend too much time, deliberating over what to do, then you could just probably end up never doing it at the same time. But like Tom says, you still do need a goal eventually, but you got to get started.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
I'm actually comment real quick though. Me and Jay, we just covered this in the episode before this one, so episode 58. We talked about using some of the hardware, the random things like even broken laptops. See, one of my staff had a laptop with a smashed screen. That was one of his servers for some project he had at home for a while because he didn't want any. Like we have plenty of stuff at the office to play with because we have a pretty big lab environment at the office that all my staff gets to play with. But having some of these broken laptops, like he took it home. He's like, cool, I can run a few things on here, and it's quiet. It doesn't, by the way, it has a built-in battery in it. So if the power goes out, it already has a UPS.
So. It has a UPS and a KVM because it's got a screen and a keyboard mouse on there.
Yeah,
so you literally have a self-composed server environment.
Yeah. I totally agree. And so the 100 days of Homelab stuff. Yeah. So I appreciate it. Yeah. I've been, like I said, noodling on it for a long time. I know that some people, are don't know how to get started, don't know where to get started. I honestly think even if you say, hey, day one is planning, and that's totally fine too. Like it doesn't have to be hands-on. A big part of having a home lab or building systems is design and planning. So day one could just be thinking about it, planning it, setting aside some time to document or diagram or explore or read. I mean, that's totally fine too. It doesn't always have to be hands-on, and I think then if you just do that daily, it could become a habit. I've worked at companies where we have these daily stand-ups. And so I'm treating my one tweet a day like my daily stand-up, like, hey, here's what I'm working on, or here's the challenges I'm faced with today. and here's how I'm going to solve it. In stand up, we usually do that, and Scrum, they do that a lot. Like, hey, what did you work on yesterday? What did you work on today? Do you have any roadblocks or any challenges that you need help with? And
Yep.
I'm I'm treating this hashtag as one big scrum for everyone in Homelab, treating it like one big scrum, because I think it's important to just get in the habit of like focusing on what you want to accomplish for the day, saying here's how you're going to tackle it. And then hopefully, the next day it's something you tackled or finished or completed, and you're on to the next thing. If not, that's totally okay. On day 2, you could be working on
Absolutely.
the same thing from day 1. You could be working on that in day 90. And that's another thing too. Like, some people are asking like, hey, do I start with you? And no, you don't have to start with me. If I was on day 100 and you started on day 1, I would love it, because that means that this is living on. This is bigger than my 100 days. It's someone's 100 days, in a year. It's someone 100 days, 6 months ago. And you can see that along the way. So yeah, no pressure to start on day 1, and you didn't miss the train. The train, I hope, will be leaving every day. And it
Yep.
didn't leave on the day that my train left. Your train could leave next week. Your train could leave next year. But I hope that people will join.
And
Yeah,
people listening to this episode could check off a day
That's
yeah,
or an
right.
hour,
That's
and
right.
they were in with us.
It was
this
almost
episode
my day
counts as one of
4.
your days.
Yeah, it was almost my day 4, but I was like, okay, I'll I did retweet it, but it was almost my day 4. Then I backed up and deleted the tweet, and then I was like, okay, well, I'll just say, hey, I'm going to be on the show. My day 4. I mean, I could even say here, but yeah, it's just more. So day 4 for me of 100 days of Home Lab. What was it? Flux updates. So I run Flux. There were some Flux updates. I've been kind of pushing it down the road, but updating my Flux, which is kind of coordinates my Kubernetes. It's so meta, but it's so awesome once you do it. And then I created a bot that I wrote some code for that runs the retweets on 100 Days of Home Lab Twitter. And I got that into production. I just need to do some logging and make sure that it stays alive. So it's my day 4 is doing that.
I want to mention too, in case anyone's not on Twitter, for all its faults, it can be problematic. Don't follow problematic, and don't click on whatever's trending, because it's going to be stupid, unless it's the 100 Days of Home Lab that's trending. You can follow that. But feel free to participate in there. I've seen people trying to avoid certain platforms and things like that, but I found Twitter to not be too bad. Any social media can turn into a social distraction, but if you keep your vision focused on there and narrow and just ignore that whole. You know what? That's what we need. There's probably a web browser plugin that just removes the trending. Because every time I look, I'm like, I want to click on that because it's following. Like, I want it, but I know it's going to be stupid. Like, I know it's going to be something that's not going to be useful to me. It's certainly not going to be
Right.
tech related. So,
Yeah.
but
A lot of people might be interested in what Kim Kardashian is doing. I'm personally not interested in what she's up to these days. So
exactly.
trending is
Oh,
just
speak
not
for
going to be
yourself.
something for me. So
Or
Okay.
I see someone in the chat scene. So Dunkel says Twitter is the least worst. We'll go with that.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because it's not only Twitter. So this hashtag, obviously, a lot of social places support hashtags. Use it anywhere. Text your friend. You could
Yeah.
text your friend and say, "This is my day 4," and if that friend is holding you accountable, that's awesome. And also, and not to just plug my Discord, but we do have a channel dedicated to this, exactly this. Some people don't want to do social networks, but they're totally fine with chat clients. And we created a channel where everyone has their own thread on their 100 days, and people are actually participating. And it's
Yep.
really awesome. Our mods thought of that. I was like, this is great. This solves the problem. And if you still want to text your friend with a hashtag, you absolutely can.
Yeah, you can go as basic as text, is a little more complicated to Discord, or go all the way to Twitter. There's a lot of different options on here. So
absolutely. So yeah,
all
that was
right.
awesome. I don't have anything. I mean, I feel like I could talk about Home Lab like forever.
But
But
we
I
don't
do
have
have to
forever.
say that if we talk for more than 10 more minutes, there's gonna be sweat, like, pouring down my face because the studio heats up quick. But,
Mine is too.
man, I still wish we could have, like, a 2-hour episode chatting about this.
I'd love to come back. So I
Yeah.
think that's a segue, but yeah, I'd love to come back. Thank you so much for having me. I've looked up to you guys for years. Like I said, years, even before I started my own YouTube stuff. I'd go to you. I go to Jay for Linux, and I go to Tom for storage and PFSense and TrueNAS, or it was, it was
It's so
FreeNAS at the
funny.
time. But yeah,
Yeah.
I refer to you guys' channels all the time. And it's not just lip service. I know, when people ask about certain topics I'm not as educated on, I'm like, go to Tom. He wrote the book on
Well,
it. Go to Jay. Absolutely has a very focused, tutorial on how to do exactly what you're looking for.
yeah,
It's
and I
interesting when
think
I
that's
get that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's really important. I mean, YouTube is a very I never see it because I've seen some people that have this in their head, other creators, or when they first get started, thinking it's a competitive space like business, but it's much the opposite because even business isn't that competitive a lot of times. It's more about collaborative. And once you understand that, in like I said at the very beginning, we're the full stack between the three of us. When you work in these environments, no one person knows everything. I don't have time to be a Kubernetes expert and a TrueNAS expert. I mean, you watch my ZFS, which by the way, I'm wearing my Cult of ZFS shirt. But if you watch my ZFS as a cow video, like once you really take the time to understand ZFS, you're like, wow, it's a really complicated topic. I'm like, yeah, at some point my head's so full of that, I don't got time for Kubernetes. I
Yeah,
just
no,
watch Techno
Yeah.
Tim's video and follow the instructions.
It's
it's a,
kind of
it's a,
weird to me when, the whole, I don't want to call it popularity, because when I think of popularity, I think of like, a recording artist that gets millions of plays or something. That's what popular means to me. But it's interesting, like I'll go on a Linux group and I'll just make a simple comment like, yeah, I agree, that's a great distro, right? And then there's like a bunch of shocked faces. I'm like, what's wrong with people? Like, was my comment just agreeing that I also like that distribution such a weird thing to say that people are shocked, and it just keeps racking up these surprise faces? And I'm like, oh, right, right. They recognize me from the thing. And I swear to God, no matter how much time has passed, that never normalizes. I never expect that. I'll like be scrolling through YouTube, you know, after work on the couch, on the TV, and I'll see my thumbnail come up. I'm like, that's weird. Okay, seeing my own face on TV. Okay, that's just weird. Moving on. But no, I totally appreciate it. I think one thing you'll find is I'm super excited about technology. I think Tom could also agree with this. Like, I'm just not the um popular feeling person. Like I'm human, everyone's human, and it is what it is. But I really appreciate that. I just love to
Yeah.
help people in any way that I could be of service.
yeah, and
Yep.
just
It's
to
like
thank you. Yeah, and just to
it's just
echo
a
what
lot of
Tom
fun.
said earlier too, like about it's not competition. It absolutely is not. In the beginning, I'll be honest, I thought it was. Getting into this, I thought it was, and it's
Mm.
absolutely not. I thought that in the beginning. Not that I thought I was competing with people. I thought I was just competing for eyeballs. But what I learned through this journey is that, what do they say? A rising tide lifts all boats. And
Yeah.
so if we're in this category, my goal is to grow the category and not my channel, because growing the category will rise the tide for all the boats in it. So yeah, it's those things you pick up along the way. And I totally agree. And again, it wasn't like, yeah, I never thought it was a competition, but from the outside looking in, that's what you think, but it's not like that at all. And it's fantastic. And I think all of us, creating content in this category is just going to help all of us too.
I think it
Well,
can be that way though. With some people, there's some competition. I feel like doing business right, um, don't compete, right? If somebody was to hypothetically, because Tom and I are both in business, right? So if someone comes to me and they're like, I need to know why I should pick you over Tom. I'm like, flip a coin. Or like if
yeah.
Tom gets the gig, he's going to do a great job. If I get the gig, I'm going to do a great job. You go with either one of us, you're going to get a great result. Flip a coin, do whatever you got to do, but do both. Or which Linux channels should I watch? Should I watch yours? Watch them all. Literally, just watch every one of them. Like that's going to be my answer, because that owning everything does no good to anyone. It just
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't. Mm-mm.
I have another friend I'm helping out, and he's works at the high level of cybersecurity. But we were talking about it. Like his first concept was, well, I looked for this content, I didn't find it, so I thought maybe I shouldn't produce it for YouTube. Come back a few years later, he's like, "Oh, I needed to produce it for YouTube and look all the views it gets and things like that." So it's fun talking to people like that because sometimes people get nervous about whether or not they should post the content on there, but honestly, the amount of content there is on these deep technical topics, whether it's setting up storage servers or build automation or Ansible, once you build it and once one person starts watching it, many people start watching it. Now people just expect that content on YouTube. You go back, YouTube didn't even expect this content on YouTube. This wasn't like I mean, obviously, really digs in history. They were a dating site originally, not even a place, but now they're the place for learning. So overall, it's just kind of cool to where it's growing. And the more of us that participate in it, the more people that come to YouTube as a platform looking for that content. So
But there is one really huge problem I need to address that really we need to do something about this because it's really bothering me. So Tim has 100,000 views, and his like editing skills and video quality is far better than mine was at that same time.
oh yeah, yeah.
How the heck does he have just 100,000 views? We need to get that pushed up higher. It's not good enough. Like,
Yeah, 100,000
subscribe.
subscribers, not enough.
Yeah, like if you're not subscribed to him, do it. We need to push that up there because if he's this good at 100,000 views, like when he gets to where I'm at now, I mean, oh my God. Just absolutely subscribe to his channel. Let's get those numbers up there because they're way too low for what he's doing.
Thank you. You're too generous, and I say the same thing about YouTubers that maybe people haven't heard about too. Raid Owl or Christian Digital
Yeah.
Life. I mean, they're coming out swinging on Video Zero. And I'm like, wow, these channels have great content, very focused, and have great editing skills. In their first year, and I'm like, yeah, I think the same thing too. But yeah, I do appreciate it. There are so many channels out there that that I think deserve more subscribers than they have. So I always encourage everyone to subscribe to every channel that you're even mildly interested in, whether it's
Yep.
mine or anyone's. If you looked at a video once, just hit subscribe. That's a good signal to YouTube to say, hey, this channel is interesting and I'm going to recommend it to more people. So if you got anything, even one tip out of any video, just hit subscribe, hit
Yep,
thumbs up, hit
absolutely.
subscribe. Leave a comment while you're at it too, because all that helps the algorithm. Those are just signals to YouTube to say, hey, algorithm, this person liked this thing, and we'll recommend it to people who also like this thing. So I always encourage people to subscribe. I mean, it's like clicking thumbs up on a post. Just do it if you like it.
Just do it, and you're not going to regret it. I mean, your content's great. I watched the video, I believe it was yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, and I was really impressed by it. Everything was spot on. Camera, I liked the lighting, the editing, the narrative was great. Yeah, it's just good stuff. So your YouTube career is going to be pretty damn good. I'm just going to say that right now.
Thanks. I appreciate it. And I appreciate it. And just a little meta about editing that video. It was pretty awesome. And again, surreal, like that everyone was like, yeah, sure, I'm on board. Hand me your video and just say, go with it. And then, yeah, it was, I had to figure out how to tie the story together. And it took a while. That was the first time where I felt like I was a newscaster or something, reporting on something. It was just a different take, and it was really fun. So I hope it turned out okay, and
That
you
turned out
guys are
great.
happy with.
Oh yeah, it was great.
All right. So go subscribe to Techno Tim's channel. Easy enough to find. I'll have links in the description of the video. By the time this is the live stream's over, I always got to go back and update the links. It'll be in the podcast. Thank you very much, Techno Tim, for joining us, and looking forward to you joining us again in the future. More
Yep. Hey,
episodes.
thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Go get started on your Homelab challenge, your 100 days of Homelab. So
That's right.
all
Gotta
right.
get back to work first, but yeah,
Thanks.
right after that.
For sure. Thanks.
See you.
you.